Right, the test that you're supposed to do today, you can do it anytime today, just need to revise tonight.
But I also have a study sheet.
Wait, and that's just it.
Cole is gonna set you guys up at 12:45. Okay, you two. It's just the two of you. All right, so be in the pub. Cole's gonna bring his computer in. You guys are gonna borrow Cole's computer.
Turn in.
And these, no, keep it in your binder. I know, but I corrected it. All right. Close this down. Beep, beep, beep. Oh, I know. Got it. Let's stop. No. All right, close this down. So those of you who weren't here today, I'll let you know how to do your lab in the email this week. Okay, it's not going to be hard. No, there's a bunch that are not here today. Oh, that's juniors. Hold on. You don't want that. Yeah, her entire team has been gone this whole time. All right. Yeah, I know. There we go. Where's my Zoom? Oh, there. All righty, gang. Sorry, it took a second. Trying to get ourselves all situated. Here we are. I think I have everybody in here. Let me see. Who have I got? Yep, I got everybody. All right, good. So I got everybody, so I'll go ahead and start. So today we're going to be starting the end of this first unit on plants, okay? So this first unit of this semester is about going from the simplest life forms to the most complex. So we started with our little unicellular dudes, and now we're moving into plants, and then we will be starting animals after this. And when we wrap up animals, we'll be in fourth quarter and we'll be on humans. So lots of fun. So introduction to plants. So it's going to ask you to close your eyes and imagine for a minute after we do this homework thing. So forgot about that. So be prepared. So what's this guy right here? What's he? This one.
Paramecium.
That's a paramecium. That's right. And what's this guy right here? An amoeba. All right. And how about this guy and this guy and this guy? What are these?
Nucleus.
That's right. That's our number 3. And how about number 4? Here and here and here. What are these?
The vacuoles.
They're food vacuoles, right? Very good. And our number 5 is pointing to this red out here in the middle. What's that? That's right. And our number 6 is pointing to this guy or this guy.
Interior contract.
Yeah, those are contractile vacuoles. Yep. Very good.
The thing you said I got wrong because I put interior on it.
Oh, did it? Okay, I correct those later. Yeah, I can't guess all the things that people will write. I even try and put in misspellings, so it'll auto grade, and then I go back and
I
correct
also
it.
put amoeba with an E instead of.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So how about number 7? That's these little fuzzy things that a paramecium has. Yep, cilia. It's like they're oars. I'm sorry. 12:45 is when you have your class. Reject. Yes.
Is the name supposed to be OE or EO?
I was just.
I think it's OE. It's a weird one. Did I spell it wrong? Let me look.
I think I spelled it OE.
It's OE.
Okay.
Yep, it's a weird one. It's not what you think. You think it would be amoeba, but it's not even a word. I don't know. Number 8. What's number 8? Right here.
Flagellum.
Flagellum. And how about 9?
Cell wall.
Pseudopod.
It's pointing to the pseudopod because that's one of your options down here. And then, isn't it? Yep, there it is. Okay. And then how about this one right here? Or you guys might not have had the word bank. I think the juniors had the word bank, but that's our euglena. Right. All right.
Yeah, we didn't have.
So you're going to want to imagine for a minute here. All right. So it says, what's the color of life? That may be a silly question because living things can be any color. Close your eyes and imagine yourself surrounded by life. Now, what color do you see? So look up. You've imagined a thick forest of a teeming jungle, then just one color you'll find in your mind, and that's green, right? Because it's the color of plants. So I was mentioning to the juniors this morning that green is you know, when you read about symbolism in literature, but it's also in stuff like religion and art. Do you know what green typically symbolizes when you see it? Life. What else?
Plants, nature, plants.
Anybody go to a liturgical church that uses colors for seasons? What's green?
Normal. Ordinary.
It's ordinary because it's growing season. Green. And it can also be rebirth and hope. All right, so introduction to plants. Pardon me while I eat. Steroids have made me so hungry. I'm going to be 900 pounds before this thing's over with. All right, what are plants? Plants are multicellular eukaryotes. So that means they have what? A membrane-bound nucleus. They have walls made of cellulose, and they develop from multicellular embryos and carry out photosynthesis using the pigments chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. So what do plants need? The lives of plants revolve around the need for sunlight, water, minerals, gas exchange, and the movement of water and nutrients throughout the plant body. These are all things they're going to need to keep on doing their thing. So how did plants evolve? All right, so this right here, what is this in the picture? You guys know what that is? Kelp. Kelp, seaweed. So this is where we get, remember last week when we were talking about protists, and I was saying, okay, you're going to see these little green algae classified as both protists and plants, depending on who's doing the classifying, right? This is a good example here. So this is a type of algae. It's a multicellular algae, but it's technically an algae, and some people are going to put it with plants, and some people are going to put it with like weird protist things, those singular celled ones. So the first plants evolved from an organism much like the multicellular green algae that we have living today. And if you look on this really close, you can see, like, look right here. Do you see these things? Do you know what those are? It's really cool.
Which ones?
See these little things on here? This guy and this guy. See them? They're like little, see them?
What's the lines? What are you?
These guys right here. See these? What are those? Do you know what those are? They're actually air bladders. They keep air, they're like little balloons, and that's what helps keep it straight up, right? It's got little balloons that are pulling it towards the surface, right? Because that air is less dense than water, so the water's going to push underneath the air and the air is going to move upward. It's pretty cool. So there are 4 major periods of plant evolution, and they're right here. So we're looking like 460 million years ago, and that's when we have our green algae, particularly charophytes, that we think probably branched into our first plants. And that's going to be right around in here, which is what, like 400 million years ago, maybe? And they're going to branch into mosses. Now, if you look here, you're going to see that there are like 5 categories across the top. These are going to keep showing up. And it's going to be, these 4 really are going to keep showing up. And you're going to want to kind of take note of that. But you're going to have the mosses, then the ferns, then the gymnosperms, then the angiosperms. So these guys here are going to be, these guys here, your mosses, are going to be seedless and non-vascular. Then your ferns are going to be seedless, but they have vascular. And then you're going to get here and you've got vascular and seeds in cones. And then when you get all the way over here, you've got flowering plants with seeds and fruit and vascular tissue. And that's good. That's the general track. Okay. And then right here, our early vascular plants are going to come in. These are going to look like ferns and whatnot, right? And then you get seeds. And then lastly, fairly recently, comparatively, you end up with flowering plants. So here's the chlorophyta and charophyta bit, where last week we were talking about the same organisms as protists. This week we're talking about them as seedless, non-vascular aquatic plants. Okay, fun, right? So what is this green algae? It's a great picture, so pretty. Green algae are large, informal grouping of algae consisting of chlorophyta and charophyta, and also Charophyta streptophyta, which are now placed in separate divisions. There are about 22,000 species of green algae. Many scientists, many species live most of their lives as single cells, while other species form colonies, long filaments, or highly differentiated macroscopic seaweeds. What does that mean, highly differentiated macroscopic? Highly differentiated would mean it has different structures, right? And what's macroscopic?
On a large scale.
Yeah, big enough that you can see it with your eyes, like that kelp we just looked at, right? So these are what we call our seaweeds. The land plants or embryophytes are thought to have emerged from the charophytes. Thanks for telling me. Good luck in there. So yeah, so you've got, yeah, don't fall in. So yeah, this is where we think they're coming from, that these charophytes were the predecessors to our earliest land plants. So these are going to be our earliest land plants, and they're still around. This is Bryophyta. If you went out in my backyard, you could find you a Bryophyta example in 30 seconds. So these are seedless, non-vascular plants. All right, so what is a bryophyte life cycle like? First, bryophytes are interesting in that they kind of exist between, you've got a sporophyte and a gametophyte, right? And we'll talk about both, but these bryophytes sort of, most plants live in their kind of adult form most often, their diploid form, but these lower plants, they kind of tend to straddle the line a lot. So bryophytes, have life cycles that depend on water for reproduction. They don't have any vascular tissue, so they can draw up water by osmosis only, a few centimeters above the ground. So think about moss. Does moss get very tall? No, because they have no way to transport water or nutrients through their bodies. They absorb it through osmosis. They absorb it right into their cells.
In the book, it said only a few meters.
Ah, well, that was a mistake. Only a few centimeters, it should say. So these little guys that you see here in the picture, these are called seta, and these are actually the reproductive structures in moss. You've probably seen them. If you go out and look at moss, they're usually there, right? Okay. So what are our types of bryophytes? We've got three major types, okay? They include mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. All right, in bryophytes, the gametophyte is dominant, recognizable stage of the life cycle, and the stage that carries out most of the plant's photosynthesis. That's kind of their adult, okay? But they do straddle the line more than others. This right here, sorry, I have to eat, is a liverwort. And there's moss mixed in with it. So here's what we have, mosses. All right, mosses have green flat structures that look like leaves, but they're not really leaves. And they absorb water and nutrients. They absorb it right through their cell walls, right into their little structures, okay? That's why they're flat. If you were to look at moss under a microscope, they're pretty flat, the little leafy looking things. They have traits that are adaptations to dry lands, such as stomata, present on the stems of the sporophyte. So that would be on the stems of those big tall pieces that we saw just a minute ago. They're anchored to the substrate by rhizoids, which originate from the base of the gametophyte. So trees and flowers and plants like that you're probably used to seeing diagrams of underground have big roots, right? Mosses don't have roots. They have what are called rhizoids. If you pull up moss, you'll see it has these little feathery hair-like structures underneath. And that's like their roots, okay? But it's called rhizoids. The moss life cycle follows a pattern of what we call alternation of generations, where the gametophytes form male and female gametophores, which fertilize to form a sporophyte. The spores are released from the sporophyte to produce new gametophytes. That's how it goes. Alternation of generations. So sometimes they're living in a sporophyte form, which is their haploid. Sometimes they're in a gametophyte form, which is their diploid. So the gametophyte form produces the gametes. So it's the adult diploid form, right? The concentric tissue around the mouth of the capsule, that's that little top piece we saw on that seta, is made of triangular close-fitting units that open and close to release spores. And the little holes, called a peristome, that's what they spit out of. It increases the spread of the spores after the tip of the capsule falls off at dispersal. So when moss spread their little gametes, they're called spores. Okay, so when we talk about gametes that don't require sexual reproduction, you would call them spores. So we're going to talk about them with moss and also with ferns. So we have liverworts and hornworts. So here's liverworts and hornworts. So if you look real close here, these are so cool. I love these. So this is liverwort. And liverwort has these big flat lobed leaves. And then on top of it, it grows these structures here. And it also grows these structures that look a little like tiny, 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 tiny palm trees. And it's really neat because the little palm tree looking like things, they look like umbrellas without the netting through them. Like if you took an umbrella and peeled all the fabric off of it, right? And those drop the spores. These are the spores, these tiny little things. And they drop them down and they land in these little cups that are growing on top of this lobe. It's called a lobe in this case, not a leaf. But these are called splash cups. So when it rains, think about what happens. The rain hits them, and where do the little spores go? Right? That's how they spread their spores. That's how they reproduce. It's really, really kind of cool. That's a hornwort, so it's a little different. So the leaves of liverworts are lobate, right? They're lobes, and green structures similar to the lobes of a liver, which is why it's called a liverwort, because that's kind of the shape of them. While hornworts have narrow pipe-like structures. The gametophyte stage is dominant stage in both liverworts and hornworts. However, liverwort sporophytes do not contain stomata, while hornwort sporophytes do. The cycle of liverworts and hornworts allows alternation of generations. Spores germinate into gametophytes. Zygote develops into a sporophyte, then releases spores, and then the spores produce new gametophytes, and it just keeps going.
Hornworts makes me think of if you didn't get into Hogwarts,
Yeah.
you had to go to Hornworts.
You had to go to hornworts. So liverworts develop short, small sporophytes, where hornworts develop long, slender sporophytes. So to aid in spore dispersal, liverworts utilize what they call elaters. And in this case, that would be something like these splash cups. And liverworts and hornworts can reproduce asexually through fragmentation of leaves into what they call gemmae that disperse and develop into gametophytes. So you can have different methods of reproduction for these. Big things to know, though, is that these are your seedless, non-vascular plants. Okay, we're gonna categorize plants as seedless, non-vascular, seedless, vascular. We're gonna make sure that we have that memorized and what falls in that category. All right, so come on, do your thing. Click. There we go. All right, so this guy is going to talk to you about the sex life of bryophytes. It's interesting. He's an interesting dude. He's got a good video for you.
That's literally the title of the video.
Yep. If I have sound, where's my sound? Oh, hold on. What's up? Hang on. Hang on. I think the stereo turned off at some point. It was on before. Oh, it's on. Very quiet.
Talking very intently.
I don't know. Why can't? Hey, dude, why can't we hear you? Stop talking. Okay, do your thing again and let me hear you. There we go.
Hello everyone and welcome to the forest. This is Matt from Indispensable Plants, and today we're talking about the sex life of bryophytes. It's a very wet day here in central Illinois, and it's the perfect time to be talking about this subject. So if you want to find out more, join us.
This is his life.
So the form of reproduction that plants inherited from their algal ancestors is called alternation of generations, or metagenesis. And it involves a growth phase, which is asexual, which we're seeing here, called a gametophyte, and a sexual phase, called a sporophyte. Now, this alternation of generations occurs in all plants, but it is most obvious in the bryophytes, or at least easier to see in the bryophytes. So that's why we're going to focus on them today. It's very exciting and very interesting to learn about, and it's so different from what you and I expect out of sexual reproduction.
I'll be the judge.
So this is a little liverwort called Frulania, and like most bryophytes, it's small because it has to be. You see, bryophytes came onto the scene long before vascular tissue ever evolved, which means getting water to and from their cells is kind of difficult. They have to rely on osmosis to get water and diffusion to get the nutrients they need. That means if they get too big, they wouldn't be able to supply the rest of their body with these requirements. So the world of bryophytes happens on a miniature scale, and it's one that really is best appreciated with a hand lens or a microscope. But for today, we're going to just be enjoying them on trees and on the ground and on rocks. Bryophytes' ties to water goes even deeper. They simply can't sexually reproduce without it. You see, like us, their sperm or male gametes are flagellated. They need water to swim through. Now, at the tips of each one of these stems are housed the reproductive structures. If they're male, they're called antheridia. If they're female, they're called archegonia. And when it rains and water gets sloshed around, it inevitably picks up some of those sperm. And that continuous column of water allows the sperm to swim to where they find the female archegonia. And once they find those, they can fertilize them. And from that, you will see the sporophyte. So without water, there would be no sexual reproduction for the bryophytes. It's something that their algal ancestors had left them. It's a really cool and interesting process that requires a microscope to observe, but it's interesting to think that these plants have a little bit more in common with animals than we once thought. One of the most interesting things about mosses is that the sporophyte and gametophyte generations are actually combined, although they are genetically distinct individuals. The green part of the moss tend to associate as a moss is actually the gametophyte phase. It is genetically haploid, meaning it only has one set of chromosomes, unlike us who have two, one from mom, one from dad. The sporophyte generation are these capsules coming off of these long hair-like structures at the top, and these are genetically diploid. They have two sets of chromosomes, and they are what produce the spores that will then be blown away out of these capsules into the breeze in hopes that they can find a new place to germinate and grow into a new gametophyte. Thus, the process repeats itself. It's this, again, alternation of these generations, but in the mosses, they're kind of connected. And even more bizarre is the fact that the sporophyte generation, for the most part, can't photosynthesize enough to support itself. Therefore, it is physically attached and takes water and nutrients from the gametophyte generation in order to produce the spores that it needs. I wouldn't really call this parasitism because at the end of the day, they're both benefiting through reproduction, but it's pretty cool to think that there are two genetically distinct organisms sitting here functioning as a single one.
This dude loves moss.
Well, everyone, I hope this gives you a new kind of appreciation for the world of bryophytes. They're great plants to just take the time to get to know them.
I thought
If you're
it was
enjoying
just
these
in a
videos,
big
don't
picture.
forget to hit subscribe. And
So he
continue to
reminds me of,
follow us on social media accounts. We are really-
I think it was my sophomore year at Hollins. No, it was my junior year. It was my junior year. We were hiring a new biology professor because we had an opening in the department and we wanted someone with a botany focus because we had someone with like an ecology focus and we had someone that did a lot of she did a lot of microbiology and then someone else did a lot of neurobiology. So we wanted somebody with a real with a real botany focus. And this guy came and he interviewed me, stayed for like a couple days and I got to show him around, was part of my job for the thing. But his entire like doctoral thesis was written on these long extinct Paleozoic ferns or something. He started talking about them and he was just as excited as this guy with the moss. Like he went on and on about these ferns. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's cool. You like your ferns? I really liked his ferns. So this is from your notes. So your characteristics of plants. Yes, both grasses and mosses are examples of plants. Green algae are now considered to be protists or plants, depends. Again, a few plants are either parasite or saprobe. Let's see, what else do we have? In plants, you got chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, they're in the chloroplasts, right? Sunlight and oxygen are needed for photosynthesis. Plants do require oxygen for cellular, that's not right. Plants require oxygen, that should be false. Why does that say that? Cellular respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. So that one's not, okay, book answer wrong. Land plants evolve as structures that promote water loss. They limit water loss, right?
I'm
And
pretty sure
plants.
that was in the textbook too.
Was it? I'll have to look. Well, maybe they're talking about something. I'll have to look that up, see exactly what they're referencing, because that's a little odd.
What did they say the opposite was?
Because I was confused. but
Where?
It said that's what happened.
Well, you do require oxygen. Oxygen is required for cellular respiration, but I'm wondering why they put that. I'll have to go look back at the book and see exactly what context that's in. It might make sense in context, but
Yeah.
kind of sitting here by itself looks weird. So plants usually take in water and minerals through their roots. And you guys can read all that and get that later, right? Same stuff. Same thing here. Here's your little alternation of generations diagram. And that guy just talked a whole lot about it because he was really excited. So what evolutionary trend is observable in the relative size and stages of life cycles of plants, starting with green algae and ending with seed plants? So as plants evolved, relative sizes of the two stages of the life cycle changed. The haploid stage, or gametophyte, got smaller, and the sporophyte, your diploid stage, got larger. Only multicellular bodies of green algae are gametophytes. Mosses have relatively large gametophyte and smaller sporophytes. Ferns have small gametophyte and larger sporophyte. Blah, blah. Y'all can check this too. Got that for you. Alrighty. And this one too, lastly. So in vascular plants, and we're going to talk more about this in a minute. I think this one is maybe out of order from your notes, but xylem and phloem, which we're getting there. So here's our vascular plants, seedless vascular plants. All right, yes.
1245 or 1240?
1245. But if you go over at 1240 and turn it on, that would be great.
Yeah, no, I was at 1235. That was just my computer restarted.
Okay. So our seedless vascular plants are going to be most recognizable to you guys as ferns, although there are a couple other types. So what are vascular plants? Both forms of vascular tissue, xylem and phloem, can move fluids throughout a plant body, even against the force of gravity. Here's how you remember which is which. Your xylem is the stuff that's going to be pumping up from the roots. So it's doing a lot of, I can't keep turning my neck. Oh, my back is mad at me. Your xylem is going to be doing a lot of active pumping. Okay, now your phloem does some pumping too, but you need to think of it more as it's coming from the leaves and it's flowing to the rest of the plant. And if you can remember that it's flowing to the rest of the plant, you'll remember what the phloem is versus the xylem. So you plant vascular tissues, you've got your xylem. So here it is. Xylem is primarily involved in transporting water and minerals from the roots to the shoots and leaves and providing structural support. So think about this for just a minute. Imagine you have a little stalk of celery, right? And you stick it in colored water. You've probably done this. Everybody's done this, right? What happens? You can see it go up, right? That's your xylem functioning, right? You can see it go up. You can see it go into the leaves. Ooh, if you didn't put it in water and you just left it on the counter, what would happen to it over time? Dry out. What does it look like when it dries out? What's a stalk of celery look like if you just leave it out? It gets all floppy, right? It's wilted. It gets all floppy and rubbery. You can bend it all around. That's because it's got no structural support anymore because it's lost liquid from the xylem. And it's actually called turgor pressure. And it's the amount of water within the structures, within the cells, within the xylem that keep the plant erect and straight and growing the way it's supposed to grow. If you run out of turgor pressure, you get this little floppy plant. So xylem vessels are tough and strong. So these vascular bundles are found in the center of the root to resist forces that could pull the plant out of the ground and are arranged near the edge of the stem with the phloem on the outside and the xylem on the inside to help the stem resist compression and bending forces caused by the plant's weight and the wind. And you'll find that xylem and phloem are actually organized differently in your two major categories of angiosperms, which are monocots and dicots. Your phloem over here is a vascular tissue in plants that functions primarily in transporting organic food materials like sucrose, right, from the photosynthetic organ, which is your leaf, to all the parts of the plant. And this type of transport is known as translocation because you're changing location where the sugar was, right? In woody plants, particularly trees, the phloem is the innermost layer of the bark next to the wood. Now, this is how when they look at tree rings, they can tell whether or not it was a dry year or a wet year. Scientists can look and they can see because they can measure. You get these tree rings formed by phloem, and you can go and see, did they have a lot? It was a good year, bad year? They can measure them and tell all kinds of things. And actually, in a couple of weeks, when we start talking about like the use of wood and stuff, and it talks about spruce being particularly useful for instruments. If you want to look up something really interesting, do you know what Stradivarius is? What an instrument a Stradivarius would be? So Stradivarius is a type of violin made by Antonio Stradivari, and he made these violins that make an absolutely beautiful sound. It's different, a little different than most violins, and professional violinists can really pick it out. They're worth millions of dollars today, millions. Like one violin might be like $7 million, and that's because they're so unique and you can't replicate the sound. And they've done some research on why you can't replicate the sound. It's because he harvested spruce from a particular forest that had a particular history as far as climate and weather went that caused the wood to grow in a particular way. Plus, there was a chemist who also found a particular sort of dispersion of chemicals throughout the wood, like just natural organic chemicals. And you can't make a new Stradivarius. You can't do it. You can only get these few that exist still. So it's pretty interesting. So what are the types of seedless vascular plants? So we did our seedless non-vascular, and those were bryophytes, right? And those were mosses, hornworts, and liverworts. Now we're going to seedless vascular plants. So these are going to be what we call club mosses. That's this stuff right here. Some people call it reindeer moss. Horsetails and ferns. So the life cycles of seedless vascular plants, so ferns and other vascular plants have a life cycle in which the diploid sporophyte stage is the dominant stage. Okay, this right here, you ever seen this in the woods? Do you know what this is?
Yes, I had some.
So they call this a fiddlehead, and it's actually a fern frond before it's fully opened. They're really pretty. And it's called a fiddlehead because it looks, and we were talking about a violin again, but it looks just like the end of the violin, right?
Looks like a Christmas decoration.
Yeah, they uncurl like a little spiral. It's really kind of cool. And then their little fronds open up. They're very pretty. So I know these look a little weird. This is your fern life cycle. These dudes have strange claymation looking like things that aren't really clay. It's creative. It's a creative way of going about this. Mm-hmm. This cracked me up. I had to share it. Isn't it great?
Here we go again. Awesome.
I love it.
Somebody spent a lot of time on that.
Somebody did spend a lot of time on it. That's pretty funny.
It was worth it every second.
I enjoyed it. Yep. So
That took so long.
we've gone from our seedless non-vascular to our seedless vascular. Okay, and now we're on our seeded vascular. Okay, so here are seeded vascular plants. This is actually a beautyberry. I have one in my backyard. They're really cool. And that color's not messed with. That's actually the color. It's really wild. I never eaten them, but they're really pretty.
I think you're not supposed to.
I think you're not supposed to either, but then I saw something about them online that implied they were edible, so I haven't looked it up yet.
Have you ever eaten them?
How would you know if you didn't try?
Well, there you go. I mean,
Just take some, throw it.
the proof is really in the pudding, James.
Mhm.
It's kind of sad that you can't see it.
And then we'll
So
make
what
it
adaptations do seeded vascular plants need to move to drier land? All right, adaptations that allow seed plants to reproduce in areas without water include flowers or cones, that transfer the sperm by pollination and protection of embryos in the seeds. Do you know what these are?
Berries.
They're actually, this is the fruit left by a particular flower. But do you know what flower that is? That's poppy.
Oh.
After the petals fall, this is what a poppy leaves behind.
Are they edible?
Oh, yeah. So what's produced from poppies? Do we know?
Weed.
Poppy seed.
No,
Poppy seeds. Yep.
I don't know.
Opium.
Nice.
Opium comes from poppies.
Poppies, really?
Right now, poppies are about my favorite thing. That's the only thing keeping me standing. So yes. So yeah, poppy fields that if you look back in history at the way like opium was used in particular cultures, like by those in power against those who were not in power, like to sort of make them all addicted and that sort of thing. Yeah, poppies have been throughout history kind of a thing. But yes, poppy seeds. Now here's an interesting thing about poppy seeds, as Piper brought up. So poppy seeds do have a tiny bit of opium in them, not enough that if you ate like poppy seed muffins, you would have major problems. But sometimes people eat a lot of poppy seed muffins and bagels and things, and they've had issues with drug tests. That's a very rare thing, but it does happen. But here's an interesting little tip I learned from a doctor once. If you've got somebody who's sick, like terrible diarrhea that doesn't stop, you can actually get poppy seeds from the store, get a whole thing of them, get a spoonful of them, mix it in applesauce or something and swallow it. And the reason is because it is an opiate. Opiate stops smooth muscle contractions, and the smooth muscle in your intestines that causes all the diarrhea, all the contracting. So you can actually take it and it can fix the problem because it can cause those smooth muscles to stop contracting.
Does it get deteriorated in the stomach?
To a degree, but not entirely.
No.
So now we have our next thing in our line of evolutionary progression. We have gymnosperms. And those of you who did like middle school biology with me might remember that I said, if you remember, Jim likes ice cream cones, Jim likes cones. We'll get to
I don't remember.
Who
that.
likes
Did you do
fruit?
that
I
class?
read
Mhm.
that, and for some
Remember that?
reason I read non-GMO.
non-GMO.
Do you remember when we scared Aniston in that class?
It was genius.
awesome.
oh,
so
great.
funny. She got a Pop-Tart and we scared her.
Yeah, we were checking her nervous system responses,
Yeah.
and everybody got real calm, and we were checking her pulse or whatever we were doing, and then we all scared her at one time, and she jumped, and we checked her pulse and everything, but she was not happy with us. She also was the one. Was she the one? She was one of the ones that cried when we cut things open.
Yeah.
So it happens, you know. All right. So here are different types of gymnosperms. We have neophytes. All right. So these neophytes are these kind of low growing, how would you describe it? Sort of weedy, but they're woody too. So the neophytes or neophyta, yeah, kind of like brush stuff, right?
Oh, okay.
Consist of 3 genera of woody plants grouped in the gymnosperms. The living neophyta comprise some 70 species across 3 genera, which they call Needham. I think this is Welwitschia. I don't ever do that one. And Ephedra. So, you good? All right. The neophytes differ from other gymnosperms in having vessel elements that are found in flowering plants. So now they have similar vessels to those that you'll see when you get to flowering plants. Next thing you have are these cycads. These are cool, right? That looks like a pineapple, but it's not. So cycadae or cycads, right, are woody seed-producing plants with no flowers or fruit. So cycads often look similar to palm trees with branchless stems and a crown of leaves at the top. I should say leaves. Whoop, I caught it for Alex. At the top of the tree, but they are not at all closely related to palm trees. Stems are usually unbranched, and fallen leaves of the past leaf scars, leaf. Oh my goodness. Fallen leaves of the past leaf scars that encircle the stem. That's a sentence for you. What's the one that Drew and I were reading Lord of the Flies yesterday, and there was a great sentence. It was presently he was,
Presenting.
no, it was, Jason must be home because all the lights just came on. His phone triggers all the lights to come. It was presently he was fatly, and it was talking about Piggy before he jumps into the pool of water at the beginning. It's like he was fatly and something else. It was a great sentence. I'll have to find it again. It was a really good sentence.
What's the genera?
Like a genus,
Yeah.
just your
It's
plural.
the same thing.
Plural. So it's a genuses. So the internally, stems are made up of soft storage tissue rather than hardwood. And the roots of cycads look very unusual and are known as what is called coloroid roots because they have this similar shape to coral. So if you think about what coral looks like, that's what the roots. The ones that I've seen, I mean, some of them can get, this big. I'm sure there are probably bigger ones that I don't know of, but some of them are houseplants. So, I mean, you can.
Big leaves?
Yeah, kind of like this. Yeah, they're kind of frondy.
No.
Like that. They're kind of
They are.
kind of needly though. They're sort of in between like a fern and a pine.
Frond,
Kind of like a yew almost.
frond is a great for you.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Who?
Yew. Y-E-W-U. Mm-hmm. So ginkgos. All right. These are the weird ones. These don't look much like the rest at all. You've probably seen a ginkgo.
I think I've heard of them.
Mm-hmm. Ever heard of anybody taking ginkgo biloba? People take it like a supplement. But they have these big flat leaves. And these leaves are actually really pretty shapes. I've seen them in decor quite often because they're pretty. But
I think I've seen them fake.
probably. It's a really popular ornamental plant. They're not from here. They're not indigenous here, but we do have them ornamentally. And part of the reason is because not only are they a beautiful kind of like a bright lime green during the summer, in the fall, they turn bright golden yellow. Like there's one on Sterling, if you come in and out the back entrance of my neighborhood, that couple like a month and a half ago or whenever it was when we had peak leaves, it was this unbelievably yellow color. Like it's super bright. Makes all the maples and stuff look sad. So ginkgo phyta consists of a single living species, ginkgo biloba. That's it. A hardy deciduous tree that resembles an angiosperm, which we'll get to in a minute, in that the woody stem is frequently and irregularly branched, and it bears broad leaves, which are fan-shaped with dichotomously branched veins. That would mean dichotomously branched in opposite directions, right? You can see it right here, fan-shaped and dichotomously branched veins. See how the veins go in opposite directions? One that way, one this way, one that way, one this way. Like the cycads, ginkgo bears microsporangia and megasporangia on separate trees. So it's got kind of like, sort of like a male and female thing going on. But
Different trees have different, but one tree only has one.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Now conifers are what you're most familiar with, right?
Wait, do two different spores have to meet to make another cycad, like ginkgo?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So conifers make up what we call pinophyta, like pine tree, right? And it's made up of living and fossil gymnosporous plants that usually have these needles, right? You can see them out there now. They're the ones that are still green, right? Yes. Oh, pencil. Did you get the stuff off the printer? I printed it. Stuff you were supposed to have. You may want to grab it. Okay. Needle-shaped evergreen leaves and seeds attached to scales of a woody bractocone. I don't know why it's written that way. So the seeds of many gymnosperms, literally naked seed. That's what gymnosperm means. Naked seed. Gymnosperm. Are born in female cones, and they're not visible until maturity. So when you see on the pine trees out there, you'll actually see two different types of cones. The ones you see in the spring that they fall on the ground and sometimes they look like a little caterpillar or something. They're about that big. They're kind of yellowish. Yeah. Those are the male cones, and that's what produces all the pollen that you see. You really see pine tree pollen because it's big. The grains are actually big. So have you ever seen one swaying in the wind and then you see the pollen come out of it? Or there's been videos of where they cut them down and they hit the ground and there's like a giant yellow cloud that comes out. That's all the male gametophytes. So that's all the tree sperm. That's pollen sperm. And then the female gametophyte is inside of those brown woody cones that you see, but you don't see them until the cone dries and they open up. You've seen the green pine cones, right? The green pine cones those are the fresh ones, and the seeds they're in there, they're down inside, but it has to dry out for them to open up those little fans where the little pricky things are on the cones and drop them out. So they're not visible until they're mature. So here are what are gymnosperm plants. Hopefully this one's crazy loud.
Do you want to know what gymnosperm plants are? In this video, we're going to give you its definition, explain its characteristics, and its reproduction. We'll also give you some examples and detail what differentiates them from angiosperm plants. Let's get started.
My hair.
Hello. What did you just do? Hello. I know.
What are gymnosperm plants? Gymnosperm plants are vascular plants and spermatophytes. But what does this mean? Well, they are produced from a seed and they also generate seeds. The Greek word gymno means naked, while sperma means seed. Therefore, its name indicates that its seeds are naked and do not develop in a closed ovary as fruit would. These plants tend to develop in all areas of the world, but with that being said, they are mostly common in cold and Arctic climates. Characteristics of gymnosperm plants. They are really old since they date back to the end of the Carboniferous period. They have vascular tissues that allow them to distribute water and other resources from their roots to their leaves. They produce a seed that does not develop in an ovary. They are woody plants with an arboreal appearance, and they have stems, leaves, roots, and seeds. They are generally plants without flowers or fruits, and they can form cones that generate fertile leaves. Examples of gymnosperm plants. There are 88 genera of gymnosperm plants, among which there are more than 1,000 different species. Some examples are the following. Pinophytas, also known as conifers, are the most important group of gymnosperms that includes around 600 species of woody plants. They are evergreen and have deciduous leaves, generally needle-shaped such as pines. Psychedophytas, also known as cycads. These are plants similar to palm trees that grow in regions with tropical and subtropical climate. Ginkgophytas, which includes several extinct species and one that is still living. That's the ginkgo biloba, a deciduous tree that is characterized by its fan-shaped leaves. And netophytes. These plants have short stems and long scaly leaves that form vines or small shrubs. Also, did you know that the largest tree in the world is a redwood, which belongs to the group of gymnosperms? Before we continue, let's put you to the test. How tall do you think this tree is? 95 meters tall, 105 meters tall, or 115 meters
They
tall?
put it in feet for us dumb Americans.
The correct answer is CP. The tallest tree in the world, called Hyperion, is exactly 115.55 meters tall, which is 179.1 feet tall. Isn't that incredible?
True.
How do they reproduce? The female cones contain a scale with 2 ovules, while the smaller male cones are formed by 1 scale and 2 pollen sacs that form pollen grains. Both the pollen grains and the ovules are called gametes because they're the reproductive cells. Reproduction begins when the wind carries the pollen grains to the female flowers, and the pollen tube penetrates to the ovule so that the gametes fuse together and give rise to the zygotes. After fertilization, the seed is formed and the female inflorescence transforms into a cone. After a while, this cone opens and releases the seeds that will form new plants when they fall on the ground. Together, both the pollination and the fertilization are a slow progress that can take even more than a year. In addition, the maturation of the seeds can take up to 3 years.
See all the little male cones there?
Differences between gymnosperms and angiosperms. As mentioned before, gymnosperms bear seeds, while the seeds of angiosperms are covered by fruit. Gymnosperms are usually perennial plants, while angiosperms are usually seasonal. While gymnosperms have cones, angiosperms typically have flowers. Unlike gymnosperm leaves, which are usually pointy and needle-shaped, angiosperms leaves are usually flat. In addition, gymnosperm plants are usually woody, while angiosperms are usually herbaceous. Some examples of angiosperm plants are orange trees, sunflowers, lilies, and birch trees. Let us know in the comments below if you would like us to also make a video.
Thank you. So thanks to her little intro there, we now have a little background on angiosperms before we go into them. So angiosperms are your seeded flowering plants. This is your source of fruit, right? And fruit, when you think fruit, you probably think like the little Asian pear I just ate or whatever, but lots of things are considered fruit. like a rose hip is considered a fruit, or that little thing on the poppy that we saw a minute ago is considered fruit. Cucumbers, right? All kinds of things are considered fruit. So how do angiosperms reproduce? All right, so angiosperms have unique reproductive organs known as flowers. Flowers contain ovaries, which surround and protect seeds. When you eat an apple, you're eating an apple tree ovary. It's a mature ovary. That's what you're eating. Yep, that's fun, right? So here is your flower, and it's got different parts. And we'll be going over this. This is something you're definitely going to want to know, okay? So your flower has both male and female parts. This is a hibiscus flower, if you've ever seen one. People make hibiscus tea and stuff too, and they're really pretty. My mom has one down there. Hers is, actually she has two, but one of them's a baby. It doesn't do much. But the one outside her door, if you were ever out there in the late summer or whatever, you may have seen these big white flowers. They're like this big, they're huge, and they only last like a day, right? But they're big. So this up here are the anthers and the filaments, and together the anther and the filament make the stamen, and that's your male part, okay? Because the anther is where the pollen is held. And then you have this whole structure that goes from here to here, and that's called a pistil. The top of the pistil is this little sticky surface, and it tends to have openings on it. That's your stigma. And then there's this long piece that comes down called your style, and they go together. And basically your goal here to reproduce is to get one of these male gametes right here, because your female gametes are actually all the way down here in your ovary. Inside the ovary are what we call ovules. And so if you get your male gamete here, there's actually this whole process that goes on, we'll talk about in a couple of weeks, where the pollen actually does something. It grows a tube, and it grows it all the way down into here so that you can fertilize these little guys. So we have different kinds.
How often is there asexual reproduction? Because usually isn't it from one
Well,
place to the other?
so here's the thing. It's kind of different the way you think about it. So this is, okay, but by the way, there's your fruit when it grows, right? This thing that turns into that. And this little thing that turns into that. So if you, all right, so say you're a flower and you fertilize yourself, you still combined a male and a female gamete.
Oh,
So
they're both yours.
it's like sexual reproduction, but you've made a clone,
Yeah.
right? And then,
Asexual, but sexual.
yeah,
Basically.
I mean, basically sexual reproduction occurred in that you had a male, you have a haploid gamete and a haploid gamete, and they come together, and now you have a diploid organism, but it's a clone of its parent.
Yeah.
Whereas in the case of, like, remember Mendel, he would go along and he would fertilize different flowers from different flowers to try and see what he would get.
That's what bees
So
do.
yeah, that's definitely sexual.
That's what bees do.
Yeah, bees do it too. Yep, Mendel was acting like a bee, basically.
So how often does the plant make another one?
It depends on the plant. I mean, a lot of plants, some plants they'll refer to as like the male plant or the female plant. And that's because some of them tend to have like more male structures or more female structures, and you need more than one to make it work, but not always. So sometimes if you have like, you have 2 apple trees or 2 peach trees or whatever. Hey, Cole, can you pop that microwave so it doesn't do that again? Oh, is he? Okay. So sometimes you might need 2 because it's going to increase your chance of fruit, because you're more likely to get fertilization that way. And you may have one that bears more fruit than another, and they'll kind of refer to that as like the female tree, but really they tend to have both structures usually. So you've got different kinds of fruit. You've got this whole category here, which we call dry fruit, and then you have this fleshy fruit. So the dry fruit are things like an iris that has a capsule that opens up. We have canna lilies down here. They're the same way. They make these little like these little prickly looking things that open up, and there's little seeds in them. And then also legumes. So legumes are peas, green beans, things of that sort. They're dry fruit because you don't want to eat it. Like, peas are not fleshy until they're cooked. If you think about it, they're really not. They're kind of hard. Also, almost any kind of bean that you eat is like a lima bean even.
Coffee.
That's a little different. But yeah, I don't know
Is it
exactly how they fall. Yeah, I mean it is, but I don't know where it falls in the category of, it's probably dry. Yeah. And then you have these guys too. So these are the little dry fruits that,
You dry them out so that you can.
yeah, crush them
grind
up.
them.
Yeah. So these are the guys that you can think about nuts. And the difference between these is these open up like, psh, right? Whereas these don't open up. These float, right? And these don't. But these guys have to kind of explode in order to get their seeds out, right? You guys have seen these. What do you call them? Yeah, that's what I call them, helicopters, right? Those are from maples, right? And then you know what this is? This is a dandelion. When you blow on the dandelion, all these little guys go. That's why, like, it's fun to blow on a dandelion, but if you've ever done it in your yard, your mother was probably like, stop, or your dad, whoever takes care of the weeds, because you're just spreading the seeds. And then you've got your fleshy fruit down here, and there's all kinds of different fleshy fruits that fall into different categories. Mm-hmm.
Wait, what is the scientific name for cucumber?
It falls under Peppo is the
Genus?
genus, I believe, for these. Yep. And then you've got different kinds of berries, like a tomato is technically berry.
Love cucumber.
And then drupes, these are like the stone fruit, right?
'Cause
And-
the seeds are super high.
Yeah, they call them stone fruits, things that have one big pit in the middle. And then the Hesperidium are things like oranges, limes, grapefruits.
Citrus, all of them?
No, most of, yeah, and there are probably a couple of other things in there too, but like a pomelo, if you've ever had a pomelo. Pomelo, I have had a couple lately because they've been coming from my produce delivery thing, but they're like a big grapefruit looking like thing. And there's a lot of pith between like the rind and the actual fruits, really thick,
Yeah.
but they're like a pink grapefruit, but sweeter. They're good. And then apples are pomme, right? Actually, that's the French word for apple. Very similar.
Yeah, is
I think the Spanish one's different though. It's manzanilla or something, right? Yeah, something different.
Wait,
Yep.
what would a plum be?
A plum is a drupe. It's a stone fruit. It's got one big
Oh,
thing in the
that's
middle.
right.
Yep. And then there's all kinds of different categories over here of fruit. You can,
Wow.
lots of ways to do it. So what about seeds? So we have two major categories of seeds, monocots and dicots, okay? Monocotyledon and dicotyledon. So monocots and dicots are named for the number of seed leaves or cotyledons in plant embryo. So monocots have one seed leaf and dicots have two. So think for a minute about the last time you had either peas, green beans, lima beans, kidney beans, any bean like that you could take, and if you wanted to with your fingers, you could break it into two parts, breaks apart in the middle, like a peanut. Peanut does that, right? Take a peanut, you can break it apart in the middle and you got two little halves, right? That is a dicot. It's got two, right? A monocot, think about a kernel of corn. Can you do that with a kernel of corn?
No.
You can squeeze that little white thing out of it, but that's not the same thing. You
Is it
can't
that?
break it.
No, what about a pea? Like, you
A
said-
pea is a dicot. You can split a pea into
Yeah.
two.
Okay, yeah,
Well, split pea soup. That's the very essence of it.
I don't know. what it is.
It's peas. Peas with ham and carrots and onions and deliciousness. Oh, I love it.
Is a dicot two haploids or diploids?
No, these are all going to be seeds. So at this point, they're ready to grow a plant. So it's diploid. But what we're talking about here is the seed leaf. So what we mean by that is if you plant it, it's got two little things that come out versus one little thing that comes out. So these are ways to tell one from another. So your monocots, like a kernel of corn here, are going to have a single cotyledon. That's your one seed leaf. And your dicots are going to have two like this, just like we were saying. You ever open a peanut up and it looks just like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right?
They're cashew.
Yep. And then your monocots have leaves that look like this. They're parallel veins. So if you think about like how grass looks or corn, here's your corn again, another great example. You've got these parallel veins that run like this, whereas here's a maple leaf and it's branched. Okay. So if you're seeing a leaf like this, it's a dicot. And if you see a leaf like this, it's a monocot. Another way to tell is say you just have a flower. You don't have a leaf, but you have a flower to look at. So if you wanted to count petals, your monocots are going to be in multiples of 3, always. And your dicots are going to be in multiples of 4 or 5, which is really interesting. You could count the petals and see how many you have. And before, when I said your vascular tissues, Cole, what are you doing? Are going to be arranged a little differently in monocots and dicots. So in your monocots, your vascular tissue bundles are going to be scattered kind of evenly like this. But in your dicots, they're going to be in a ring like that. So with a cross section, you could tell which is which. And then lastly, your monocots are going to have roots that spread everywhere like that. Looks like grass, right? Whereas your dicots are going to have like one main root and then some other roots that spread off of it, like a dandelion. This is the problem with dandelion. This tap root here that they have is really tough. So if you try and pull this up from the ground, you ever tried to pull a dandelion out and you just pull the top of it off and the little root stays there, right? Every time.
Or you pull it out and there's a whole chunk of it.
Yeah. So basically it's just going to keep growing because you didn't kill it, right? If you pull the top of it off, which is the easy thing to pull the top of it off, right? But then the root stays and you still have problems. My grandfather used to walk around with a screwdriver and he'd dig it down on the side and pop them up with a screwdriver. He was pretty good at it, actually. So plant life cycles, we have 3 different categories of plant lifespans. We've got, you good, Cole? We got annuals, biennials, and perennials. So you probably heard this if you've ever been to a nursery or gone plant shopping with your parents in the spring or in the fall when you're going to redo a garden. Annuals, biennials, and perennials. So what is going on? Cole, what are you doing? You are so distracting.
Why
God,
do you hate learning?
yeah. What's wrong with you?
Education is a privilege.
Yeah, cool. So there are 3 categories of plants. Annual, biennial, and perennial. This is true. You don't fall asleep in class. I'll give you that. Plant growth. All right. So you have an annual growth cycle, biennial growth cycle, and perennial growth cycle. So here's what we look at.
Yes.
For your annuals, you have a seed, vegetative growth, flower, dies. Then that seed gets planted and it comes back. Ding, 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 round and round. Your biennials have a seed, it grows, it goes dormant. Then it comes back. Then it makes a flower, then it dies, then you get a seed. So you basically get 2 years out of it. Whereas this one, you got 1 year. Yep, first year doesn't flower. Second year makes its way all the way around.
What is dormant?
Dormant, which we're going to get to in a couple weeks. But basically, dormancy is when a plant kind of shuts down all of its processes. It's not dead, but it's not productive. It basically has a way to kind of suspend animation, just stops for a bit.
It looks dead, but it isn't.
And there are some plants that we actually plant for the purpose of being their dormancy stage. Like there's one called red stick.
Hibernation.
Does it like turn red when it's in dormancy?
Yes, basically it loses all the foliage and it's just sticks, little sticks coming out of the ground, and they're bright red. And people will plant red stick because it stays that way all winter. It's color. So it's really pretty. Yeah, whoops, I bumped that. So perennials are a little different in that you get your seed, you get vegetative growth, you get a flower, and then you get dormancy. And in the dormancy stage, it's going to come back and make both vegetative growth, and then sometimes flowers will die and then you get seeds, but it keeps going. So if you have a plant in your yard that you planted and it's still there and it's still growing every year, that's a perennial. So usually I like perennials because you don't have to replant them every year. But annuals, if you plant things like over here, annuals, if you plant things like, what's that? A begonia, I think.
Daisy?
No. Daisies come back every year.
Yeah.
So daisies are perennials. They come back every year and they come back with a vengeance. They do. They spread like crazy. Perennials here. These are some different kinds that you might see planted in people's yards. Biennials. And then these are what they call tender perennials. And I think these, I think that's what it is. Like it depends on temperature and whatnot. Like they will come back in some situations, but not all. So in examples here. So your annuals, like we said, is a flowering plant, completes whole life cycle in one season, basically a year. So this is things like peas, but it's also things like chickweed, right? And then your biennials usually take 2 seasons. And a great example of that is onions. So if you want an onion harvest, you got to wait on it. And then lastly, your perennials come back every year. Strawberries is another great example. So if you've ever planted strawberries somewhere, they're going to pop right back up the next year. And they'll spread too, actually. They have a whole different method of spreading, which is interesting. So what are woody and herbaceous plants? Okay. So woody plants have stems that live for several years. They add height, new growth, height and width each year. Herbaceous plants, on the other hand, have stems that die back. So your herbaceous plants are things like this, the green stems, the green mushy, not mushy, but not woody, not rigid. These are herbaceous, right? Like squishier, you can crush it if you stepped on it. Right? If you look out there, everything that you can see from this height is woody. But if you were to go and look at like a daisy is a great example, that's herbaceous. So is a tomato. So is, what's another good example?
A pea.
Yeah, peas. Most things that you're gonna put in your garden.
Most annuals is.
Cool. So you've got woody stems that contain thick, tough tissue, which is wood, found in plants that live for more than a year. Sorry, things like trees and shrubs. And then your herbaceous stems contain soft, green, juicy tissues found in plants that live for a year. Yeah.
So now most of like tree bark and wood is carbon. Is that true for all woody plants?
Yeah, I mean most living things carbon. I mean, it's in everything pretty much. So yeah, that would be true. So these are the ones that if you break them open, they're juicy inside.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes that juicy stuff is that latex-like stuff. Like if you break a dandelion stem, you ever seen the white latexy
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
come out? Yeah. Mhm. So here is a flower doing its thing. This is not as weird as the last one. You missed the last one, Cole. You'll have to watch it later.
So good. They started playing jazz with the female.
Sexual
Like the 30s,
reproduction
like
in
at the
plants.
Chicago Detective
In
Office.
this
Is it?
module,
Listen
we
up.
learn how sexual reproduction takes place in
no.
flowering plants. It is
She's got a great
spring
accent.
season. Flowers are blooming on the trees. It is indeed a beautiful
Guys.
sight. Flowers attract all of us. They are the most beautiful part of the plant, isn't it? You already know that flowers are not present only to add beauty to the plant. They are in fact the reproductive part of the plant. In the flower, stamen is the male reproductive part, while carpel is the female reproductive part. Some flowers contain both male and female reproductive parts. Such flowers are called bisexual flowers. For example, tea, China rose, etc. On the other hand, some flowers possess either the male or the female reproductive parts. Such flowers are called unisexual flowers. For example, corn, cucumber, etc.
That's when you get your male female
Now
plant.
let us know about the different parts that make up a stamen and a carpel. A stamen is made of two main parts, anther and filament. The anther produces pollen grains. It is the pollen grain that contains the male gametes. A carpel, on the other hand, is made up of three parts. The terminal part is called the stigma. The middle elongated part is the style, and the swollen bottom part is the ovary. Inside the ovary, ovules are present. It is the ovule that has the female gamete called the egg cell. For sexual reproduction to take place, a male gamete is to be fused with the female gamete, thereby forming a zygote. Now for that, the male gametes have to reach the female gametes. For this, first a pollen grain carrying the male gametes is transferred from the stamen of a flower to the stigma of the same or the other flower. Such transfer of pollen grains is known as pollination. If the pollen grain of a flower lands on the stigma of the same flower, it is called self-pollination. But if the pollen grain of a flower lands on the stigma of another flower of the same or another plant of the same type, it is called cross-pollination. Pollination occurs with the help of different agents like wind, water, or animals. Once a pollen grain reaches the stigma of a suitable flower, a tube grows from the pollen grain. This tube travels through the style and reaches the ovary. The male gamete from the pollen travels in this tube and reaches to the female gamete present in the ovule of the ovary. After that, the male and the female gamete fuse together to form the zygote. This process of fusion of male and female gametes is called fertilization. The zygote formed after the fertilization then divides several times to form an embryo inside the ovule. The ovule develops a tough coat and changes to a seed. The ovary, on the other hand, ripens and forms a fruit around the seed. At this time, the other parts of the flower, like the sepals and petals, fall off. So, a seed present inside a fruit contains an embryo, which is actually a baby plant.
Baby plant.
Each time a seed is planted in soil and provided appropriate conditions, it grows into a seedling, which then
Yeah. Oh, okay. She's done. There you go. Whoop, whoop. So there we go.
That was better than the first one.
So what?
That's better than the first
Like
one.
3 weeks.
Test is in.
No plants. when are we studying plants?
We started today.
Oh,
Oh, how much longer do you mean?
yeah.
I
You
think
said
it's
that we were
about
gonna
3.
talk about-
I think it's about 3.
Okay.
Yeah, 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
3. I'll look in a second to be sure. So here are these answers. So gymnosperms and angiosperms. I want to show you a graphic from the other classes slideshow because I tried to do a little what's the word I want? I tried to do a little summarizing for them because they didn't have it quite like yours. So this right here, you guys should commit this model here to memory. Okay, because this is a good way for you to remember. So you've got 2 major categories. Come down here out of the way. You've got non-vascular and vascular, right? Non-vascular and vascular. Your non-vascular plants obviously have no seeds. So they're over there. Then you have from your vascular 2 more categories. You've got your seedless and your seeded. And this one also breaks down into 2 where you've got your non-flowering and your flowering. And you're going to need to know that this is, bryophyta over here. And your examples are going to be things like moss. And then your seedless vascular are going to be things like ferns, right? And your seeded vascular, that is non-flowering, are your gymnosperms. And they're things like conifers, cycads, ginkgos, neophytes. And then your flowering plants are going to be your angiosperms. And there are so many of these that just giving an example is good because trying to name all of the major genera you'd be a year and a half. If you ever look up the genus and species of some random thing you find out in the woods, like I'll do that a lot. A lot of times you find like the root that looks like magnolia in front of it. That's a big one. It's very similar. Yeah, it just has to do with a particular category of a genera, basically. So if you kind of keep this chunk in mind, you've got this sort of branching diagram thing going, right? That may pop up at some point. So try to keep that one in your head. And then when we get to modeling flowers, keep that in your head. And then also this guy here, which you guys also had in your slideshow. This is an important one too, to remember. Kind of keep these in your head of what's what. So for next week, let me make sure that you all, sorry, I should have had that open and I thought I did, but I did not. So when we, the next couple weeks, here's where we're headed. I want to make sure that everybody knows where we're headed. So you have a clear end in mind because we're getting there. This is going to go, this quarter will go fast, I think, compared, it always kind of does. This quarter goes fast. So we've gone through here, and we are now at 20, right? So we did this today. We did the investigating stomata, right? And then we we completed the lab, kept it in our binder.
Yeah.
Next week, we're doing a lab that's going to take 2 weeks. Okay, it's going to take 2 weeks to run. We're bending roots. It's a process called gravitropism. And it basically puts into effect one of the tropisms of plants. Tropisms are actions or movements, basically, that plants do in response to certain stimuli. Gravitropism is obviously gravity. If you look out there, none of those trees are growing upside down. Nobody's roots are sticking up in the air. They have to know that. They have to know how to do that, right? A plant? Yeah, you can plant things upside down, but they're still going to do something. Oh, are we upside down?
Is that the plant?
To plant upside down, kind of, sort of. We're gonna plant radish seeds because they grow fast, but we're gonna plant them in jewel cases for CDs so that they're very flat, and we'll be able to rotate them. And as they grow, you'll see the roots change direction and whatnot. It should be.
Are the roots gonna move or are they gonna grow?
They'll grow and then they'll grow and then they'll grow. So if you think about yeah, they'll grow inward. Yeah, I don't want to use your record player for that though. I think you'd be mad. I think they'd be mad if you couldn't use it forever. Yeah, if you put like grass seed like in a pie dish, and put them on the record player and let it spin the whole time, just forever, they'll all go in like this. It's really kind of cool. Kind of like another tropism would be phototropism, where your house plants lean towards.
We've done that before.
Did we? I don't know.
We did for bio or earth science maybe?
No, probably not. But the
Maybe
I
watch the video.
may have watched the video. The phototropism
Oh, no,
would
that was
be
that was
like-
a science I did like in middle school.
okay, but they bend towards the light,
Yeah.
right? That's phototropism. There's lots of interesting tropisms.
And they'll bend towards like a hole in a box.
Yeah, they'll bend all kinds of different directions. So this is going to take 2 weeks. So we will finish this lab on the 1st, okay? And we'll get our data from that. So really next week is just kind of setting up this lab. And then it's going to take, we got to let them grow, right? It's got to take 2 weeks for us to complete it. And then we're going to do some flower dissection on the 1st. So I'm going to get some different types of flowers and you're going to take time to kind of dissect them, look at them, see what parts there are. And you're also going to take that time to complete the write-up for the bending roots because that gets turned in. And you're going to turn it in the same day. So when you come back, you'll complete it and turn it in. Get your data, complete it, turn it in. On the 8th is when we start our dissections of animals, not plants. We're going to dissect flowers one time. And then on the 8th, we start with our animals. And what we're going to do, the way we're going to do it is we're going to lump certain phyla of animals together per week, starting with our most simple and most ancient and moving towards our more complex. So we're going to start with things like it says macroscopic and microscopic observation of. In this case, it's phylum Annelida. And an annelida is annelids are segmented worms. So things like earthworms. Then the week after that, we move into echinidae, echinoderms, right? What's an echinoderm? Anybody know? Spiny skin. So it's things like sea urchins, right? And this is like a starfish right here. And then cephalopods. This is going to be our squid. Okay. So we've got an earthworm the first week. We're starting with something easy. And then we're moving on to starfish, sea urchins, and cephalopods, which are squid. Now our sea urchins, we're not going to so much dissect as we are going to, it's a really fun thing you can do with sea urchins. So if you take, these are all dead and preserved, huh?
What we did last time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're all dead and preserved. And we're going
Maybe
to,
still
yeah, we're going to put them in bleach and it actually dissolves their body parts, their internal soft tissues, and you're left with just the shell. You can take all the spines off. You've probably seen like a sea urchin, just the shell, but they have this really awesome structure inside that's their mouthpiece, and it's called Aristotle's lantern. And it looks like a little lantern. It's really cool. So the goal is to kind of soak them in bleach and get the Aristotle's lantern out. And it'll probably be the kind of thing where if I have to look at them and see if they fit in the small mason jars I have. And if they do, it's probably going to be the kind of thing where you take them home, leave them for a while, and then you're going to have to clean them yourself and bring them back so we can see them, because I don't want to clean all of them. It ruins the fun for you. And then we have our squid. We're going to dissect our squid too and look at our starfish. Then the following week, now we've moved up. These were all invertebrates so far, right? All non-chordates and invertebrates. We have a little break, right? And then we're going to move on to osteichthyes, which is fish, and amphibians. And this is in one day. So we're going to observe a fish that we're just going to watch it. We have some live fish. We're going to watch them. Yeah, we're going to have little goldfish, and
That's it.
they're just going to be there, and you're going to stare at them and watch what they do and observe their fins and whatever. And then we have perch that we will dissect, and we have frogs.
Right, you eat perch?
I'm not going to eat these perch. They're in bioperm, which is not healthy.
Put frogs on a fence and
Frogs on a fence. Yes, there we go. Yes, like our old friend.
the name of my restaurant.
Uh-huh. That would be a great name for a restaurant. And then our last dissection is going to be mammalia, and that's our pig. Well, every group's getting a little piggy, little fetal pig. So they're like this big.
Nice.
And they're great. These pigs and the frogs, I'm not sure about the squid. The pigs and the frogs are double injected, which means they've taken the time to put latex into their vascular system, and they put pink in their arterial system and blue in their venous system. So you can tell one from the other. That's really nice. You can really see what you're looking at in those cases. Very good. And so we've got those two.
You have 9 or
9.
Sorry,
No.
5 of each of these.
Mhm. Yeah, oh yeah,
Little piggies.
more than 5 of some of these things. Yeah, 5
Yeah.
pigs. Yeah, and then well, some of these things like the starfish or whatever, you just it comes as a bunch of them. So, and I have extra bioperm. So whenever we're done, I just put those back in new bioperm and put them back for next time. They'll last forever as long as they're in that. I mean, you could use like old school, they used to use formaldehyde and stuff is really bad, smelly. Bioperm is similar, but it's supposedly not as bad. It's the one that Carolina Biological makes, and that's where I ordered everything from. And they're like, ours is best, so we'll give it a shot. Our last animal lab before we get into humans is an animal behavior, and it's termite tracks. So we're going to be seeing what termites do based upon the surface they're moving on. So this should be interesting.
Really super slow.
It should be interesting. And then after that, we're moving into Q4, and that'll be all human. So be prepared that you've got 2 more labs left that don't involve any dissections before we hit dissections. So
Dissection.
yeah, and as it's been stated, it'll say if you're not willing to do the lab, the dissection, if you're not comfortable with the dissection, then what you'll need to do is let me know, and we will. Somebody said something and I didn't see it. Probably just somebody saying hello. Oh, I love your outfit. Thanks, Shannon. So sorry, that was sweet. So let me know beforehand. Every single one of these labs has a non-dissection option. All of them do. And they are, for the most part, going to be a printout, but you're gonna have to do the printing, because it'd be crazy if I had to do the printing. So for example, like
What time does their Spanish start? Is it
they're
1:30?
1:30. So for example, like here's your alternate lab for this one. Your alternate lab for, is this the fish? Which one? Yeah, this is the fish. So you're going to have to like color it and locate all these things. So number it, color it, and then same thing with the frog. You're going to have to number it, color it, all this kind of stuff. So this will give you an idea of what you'd be doing if you weren't doing the whole deal. Now the pig one was a little more involved. I think the pig one was about alternate dissection.
Does it have the distinct nose shape?
Well, yeah, it's a
They
pig.
just,
Yeah.
no, they
The
just.
pig one's more involved. The pig one involves sort of an origami thing. So there is a whole separate page that you print that has all these pieces of paper, and then it tells you how to put the model together. So you make a 3D model of the pig.
I couldn't test it.
That's pretty cool. But you make a 3D model of this pig by taking these pieces and sticking them together. And it's pretty much exactly how the actual fetal pig will look. If you've not seen, real quick before we wrap up, if you've not seen a fetal pig dissection, it's in your binder if you haven't flipped that far. But what you're looking at is, something like this. You'll be identifying it from its external characteristics. You'll tell if it's a male or a female pig. And then when you get down into the actual dissection, it'll break it down piece by piece, like what you're looking for. These are the kind of cuts you're going to make. And we have brand new dissecting trays this year. They're about this big, and they have like a blue latex in them. And we have pins, and the way we're going to work it is when you're going through your lab, there will be certain, wait, are we actually going to be? Yeah, of course we are, Shannon. They're going to be pins, and the pins are going to be numbered. And what you're going to do is it'll say like part number 1, you have to identify it. And you're going to take the pin that has the number 1 and stick it in that part. Yep. And then that way I will come around and grade based on whether you got them all right. So they're little plastic, like matte pins, the little flags. So yeah, Wilbur. Yep. Anybody have any questions, or are we good? We're good? Okay, so I'm gonna let these guys go. You got just a few minutes till Spanish if you're staying. I think Michael's staying. And the rest of you guys are good to go, right? All right. Bye, y'all.